Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 14th of September 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. Well, no better place to start, Mike, than Grenfell Tower.
Indeed, the inquiry opened this morning, and most people assuming that there's going to be some kind of interim report by the spring of 2018. Unsurprisingly, perhaps there were some protests, according to Associated Press here outside. This is their tweet that was pushed out earlier on this morning. A minute's silence was held for the victims at the beginning of the inquiry, and then the inquiry chairman, Sir Martin Moore-Bick, he said that he would not shrink from making recommendations. Yes, but he did refuse to permit a survivor to be on the panel. He said that would risk undermining impartiality.
Yes, you want all the government people on the panel.
That's right. He said that the hearing, that the fire was a tragedy unprecedented in modern times. And he said that he is acutely aware that so many people died and that many of those who survived have been severely affected. He's also conscious that many have lost everything. He said the inquiry cannot undo any of that, but it can and will provide answers to how a disaster of this kind could happen in the 21st century London. Now, the terms of reference have been published, of course. He's going to look at the cause and the spread of the fire. He's going to look at the design, the construction, also the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower itself. He's going to look at the scope and adequacy of regulations relating to high-rise buildings. He's going to look at whether the relevant legislation was complied with. He's going to look at the actions of the local council and other bodies before the tragedy, and he's going to look at the response of the fire brigade. I'm not certain how broad he intends to make that issue of the actions of the local authority and other bodies. I wonder whether he's going to look in any depth at the issue of regeneration. I suspect not.
I should think it will stay well away from that, Mike. But what I wanted to say is just hearing a little bit of his opening speech. He doesn't know a lot. He says that he needs to bring in a variety of experts because he doesn't have any particular knowledge, but we have one man who is put in a position where he decides whether a piece of evidence is going to be accepted or not. He decides who's actually going to bring evidence forward. Well, he's got an immensely powerful position.
That's right. Of course, a lot of what he said was procedural. It was about the fact that we're going to hold directions hearings. He was defining how skeleton arguments should be applied and sent to him. So he was laying down those kinds of rules. But as you say, he did admit that he isn't an expert, that he needs experts to give him information, and you're absolutely right.
So an unqualified person, if we take it to the root, an unqualified person is going to make judgments on the expert opinion of others.
That's right, and as you say, he's going to take in documents from experts, but then he's not qualified to decide whether those documents, the legitimacy of those documents, how does he actually compare and come to a judgment on those?
Well, he can't, and we're back at the usual business, Mike, which is that the government tells the general public who is going to run the inquiry. They're in a suit. They speak in a very educated way. So this is a trusted establishment person, and he is going to run this inquiry. But he admits from the outset he doesn't actually understand very much about any of the subjects that are required.
On the live stream this morning, just as he finished his introduction and was leaving, just as the live stream was fading away, you could hear the outcry from people in the room. So plenty of people in the room that were pretty unhappy about the situation.
And that was censored out by the mainstream media.
Well, no, it was the live stream from the inquiry itself. Right. The live stream was ending, but you could just hear the complaints,
the
unhappiness at the end. Absolutely. In the meantime, well, this is from yesterday, but I wanted to highlight it since we were talking about this subject. This is Edward DeFarn, who was one of the key people of the Grenfell Action Group blog, who had been highlighting the fact that failures of the tenant management organisation and fire safety problems at Grenfell Tower. He had been trying to highlight those for years before the fire actually took place, and he had said that it would take a catastrophic fire at Grenfell Tower before the council would act on concerns. Well, he has now said that certain local assets that have been removed from the local community as a result of regeneration, for example, the library, also the local adult education centre, and also some stables that were there for disabled children to get access to horse riding. Those were all taken away by the council. He's saying that as a result of the fire, the least the council could do was reinstate these facilities. Now, just as this article was going to press, The Guardian says that the council had given him written confirmation that the library's future would be secured, but the others haven't been to date. So that remains to be seen. What comes out of that. And then the Telegraph highlighting, and a whole bunch of other mainstream news outlets highlighting the fact that just 2% of tower blocks that hold social housing tenants have any kind of sprinkler system. They were also making the point that a significant number, about 90% of them, had only a single stairwell, just like Grenfell Tower. So clearly a lot of work for the inquiry to do. And I watch with interest to see what the outcome's going to be.
Well, my prediction, which I'm happy to make today, is that, of course, he's already said it's going to take a long time because it's very complicated. There's a lot of information, so it'll be dragged out, and then fault will be found, but the fault will be with an organisation. So no persons will be held responsible. It will all be, oh, it was a mistake really within the council. It was a mistake here. It was a mistake there. And we will learn from the lessons, and now we can move on. Yeah. That's my prediction.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to the United Nations. The General Assembly was opened a day or two ago. This is Antonio Guterres, the General Secretary, making his opening remarks. This is the 72nd session of General Assembly. The main action begins on the 19th of September and lasts till the 25th. And Theresa May is going to be making her speech to the General Assembly on the 20th. Now, I'm looking forward to this one because, of course, what will the subject of her speech be? Will it be extremism? That's quite possible, following on from David Cameron's 2014 speech to the United Nations General Assembly, if you remember, which began the current British-led attack on freedom of expression on the internet. If you remember that speech where he was shouting about extremism and domestic extremism and non-violent extremism and all this extremism that's appearing on the internet, particularly among people that don't believe the official narrative of September 11th, for example. But anyway, the main thing I wanted to highlight from Guterres' comments was his comments on the situation in Burma and Myanmar. He said the humanitarian situation is catastrophic. When we met last week, there were 125,000 Rohingya refugees who had fled into Bangladesh. That number has now tripled to nearly 380,000. Many are staying in makeshift settlements or with host communities who are generously sharing what they have, women and children arriving hungry and malnourished and so on. But what's interesting about one particular aspect of this that I thought was worth mentioning, of course, the Rohingya people, Brian, are stateless in the sense that they are not citizens of any country. And so what Guterres here is saying is the Muslims of the Rakhine state must be granted nationality, or at least for now a legal status that allows them to lead a normal life, including freedom of movement and access to labour markets, education and health services. And what seems to be being said here is, basically these people have no rights unless they're members of some state or other, in which case they get some human rights. But until that point, they don't have any rights. And this is really reinforcing the point that I've been trying to make for quite some time about this issue of human rights and
how dangerous it is.
And, well, what rights people have just by the fact that they're human beings, as opposed to the rights that are given by being a member of a particular state.
Yep.
So, we need to keep an eye on this one as well. Now let's move on to the European Union, and of course something that Alex Thompson has been highlighting for quite a number of weeks now has been the fight between the EU and Poland. And I just wanted to draw to people's attention the issue over Białowieża Forest. the oldest forest in Europe. And this has been an ongoing battle with the European Union, and it's being used for political reasons. Now, it's an environmental fight at the heart of it, but the EU using it to try to hit Poland over the head. So basically, what have we got here? It's considered to be primeval forest, and the Polish, it's basically run by local people who are considered to be foresters. And actually, I've got some members of my extended family that are foresters at Białowieża. I apologise, I'm pronouncing this really badly.
No, you're doing very well.
But anyway, the government had approved 180,000 cubic meters of wood to be logged from this forest as a result of there being disease within some of the trees in the forest. And what the local people were trying to do was to deal with that by removing the trees.
Thinning it out,
yeah. Well, but what I wanted to do was just put a little bit of perspective on this, because 35% of the forest is protected. 17% of it forms the national park area, which is recognised by UNESCO. But in terms of the 180,000 cubic meters of wood that's to be taken out of it over a period of 10 years, that compares to, for example, Britain's logging industry, which is in the region of 10 to 15 million cubic meters each year. So this is not a significant amount of wood, which is our trees that are being cut down here. But what they're trying to do is to remove the bark beetle disease from the forest. The local Greenpeace people are saying, well, no, you should just leave it be and the forest will recover by itself. But the local foresters don't agree with that. And I've had that firsthand. So that's the situation. But the EU trying to bang Poland over the head as a result of this, on the basis that Poland has not been compliant with EU law because it hasn't proceeded with an environmental impact study of the species and the protected. So basically, because Poland is not dotting all the EU I's and crossing all the EU T's, Poland being lambasted as a result. But it's not like they're logging in the sense of the Amazon or taking whole swathes of trees away.
But this is the European Union, Mike, isn't it? That people, hundreds of thousands of different pieces of legislation, so-called EU law, which people have to adhere to. We never had a country in UK like this until the EU got involved and we had more and more pieces of legislation.
Well, and indeed, if anybody was following Jean-Claude Juncker's State of the Nation speech from yesterday, we find that it's only going to get worse. The Bloomberg headline is Juncker wants a United States of Europe. Does anyone else? But of course, we've been arguing that this has been on the cards for quite some time. So, what is Juncker saying? He's sees an opportunity. Well, first of all, we should mention, of course, this is the great renaissance that Boris Johnson on Monday, if you remember, said was really great. He was really looking forward to Juncker's great renaissance of the EU. Well, we now get to see what that is. He sees an opportunity for a radical federalist push, is how Bloomberg is describing it. He called for combining the EU's two presidential positions, that of the European Commission and that of the European Council. And this is to understand the challenges of his or her job and the diversity of our member states. A future president should have met citizens in town halls of Helsinki as well as in the squares of Athens, he said. But two jobs, no good. He wants to get rid of Donald Tusk's job and just leave his own.
Centralisation of power.
Absolutely. Now, what has David Ellis said? A precursor to having a treasury is EU military union. And he didn't mention EU military union yesterday, but what did he mention? A new post of finance and economy minister. And of course, if you've got a finance minister, you've got to have a treasury.
Yep.
So absolutely no room for a multi-speed European Union. Europe must always defend its strategic interests. He said that is why today we're proposing a new EU framework for investment screening. If a foreign state-owned company wants to purchase a European harbour, part of our energy infrastructure, or a defence technology firm, this would only happen in transparency with scrutiny and debate. It's our political responsibility to know what's going on in our backyard so we can protect our collective security if needed. This is unbelievable hypocrisy, because the European Union has permitted foreign corporations to buy up all kinds of assets in Britain, for example. This hasn't been a problem. Now it's a problem.
Yep.
And he said that all members of the EU should become members of the euro. So they want to absolutely ramp up the euro. And in parallel with this, they have issued a joint paper called European Investment Policy, a common approach to investment controls. But basically, the bottom line is here, he's aiming for a United States of Europe.
Indeed. At least some of this is now beginning to circulate, Mike, because we understand that one or two of the military Twitter pages are beginning to talk about this, and other people who completely refused to listen, certainly to the UK column and to David Ellis when he was warning about this, are now starting to say, so maybe we've made a bit of an impact.
Yeah.
But the military, very important, of course, in the European Union, and also supposedly for Brexit. Well, this was sent through to me, and it really tested me for quite a while until I worked out what I was looking at. I've given you a bit of a clue, top right, Forces Media Mind Games. But this is an ice cream wagon from the British Forces Broadcasting Service. And they have one, possibly more, because I can produce another colour scheme here from part of their Twitter page. And these have been touring the country, giving out free ice creams to families, children of servicemen and women. Well, if that all sounds okay, it gets more interesting when we start to dig into how this broadcasting system is working. And we can come into this, which is the overarching organisation, the Services Sound and Vision Corporation. Very jazzy, up-to-date logos, and it all looks very good. But what we actually find is a very interesting, creative mix of news for British Forces personnel and also video and film sections. And we just took a little look at some of the news articles this morning. As always, we're going to encourage people to have a look themselves. But this is going back where they were having a look at Brexit. Overwhelmingly, the information being posted for service personnel to read is pro the EU, pro staying in the EU. So here we've got the headline, former head of army reacts to Brexit, and he's very worried about Brexit, Britain's going to break up, etc., etc. We can come on to this page, and this one is, what does Brexit mean for the UK's military? And this is a very, very pernicious little article, because it's a very glossy overview. It does not get into any of the detailed issues. It's suggesting, well, we're going to come out of the European Union, but we'll continue to work with the Europeans, and we should, because the European Union has stopped wars in Europe, etc., etc. I'll just highlight the little piece on the right here, should come in. There we are. So we've got another one, Second World War veterans warn against Brexit. Now that was of some months ago, to be fair, but nevertheless it still features when you click on this more recent article. What quality of journalists are they now using to put material together for the forces? Well, this particular article was put together by this young lady, Anna Tetlow, and she says, well, she's a junior producer for Forces News. In fact, she hasn't, it doesn't appear she's finished her training at Cambridge at the moment. So this is a student writing what's supposed to be an informative article on whether Britain's forces are still going to be inside the EU or outside. Of course, she doesn't know anything about it, but this is being drifted across, I'm going to use the word as propaganda, to the British forces. So we've got a lot of money circulating to produce government-backed media for the armed forces. We're going to keep the families happy with free ice creams. You think I'm joking? Well, good place to look with these organisations is their accounts. So we had a little look at the latest accounts posted, and I was intrigued to see that it starts in this section with, our trustees continue to pursue a policy of, quote, de-risking the SSVC final salary pension scheme. And salaries figure pretty heavily in all this documentation because they're worried as to whether they've got enough money for their final salary pension scheme. We've got a lot of money coming in. We've got here incoming resources of the charity decreased from 25 million. That's from previous 29 million. And they're also talking about resources of 38 million tucked away. We've only just been able to have a look at these figures this morning, but it's very, very interesting, the amounts of money that are tucked away. We've got a reserves policy here talking about these sums. Other charitable funds totaling 38,582,000. And they are protecting this, of course. And at the end, again, in comes the pension scheme, set aside to address all future pension scheme liabilities at 17 million. Now, all this is signed off by Air Vice Marshal Andrew Vallance, who's chair of the trustees, which is all normal, of course. Where's all the money coming from, Mike? Well, it's coming directly out of the MOD from government contracts. And money has been allocated to these organisations through LIBOR, I understand, by the Chancellor.
So LIBOR fines from the banks, the Chancellor's gathered up that money and is using it for good causes, and this is one of the good causes that he's chosen, right?
However, what we're seeing is if you go through the material, what you're actually looking at, we think, is a very controlled media outlet for the armed forces. Okay, some of it is movies, films, educational material, but what the rest of it appears to be very carefully crafted articles which are the government line, and these can now be fed to servicemen and women wherever they are in the world. We just had a little look at Mr. Vallance, and here he is. He's got a very detailed RAF history, which is all fine and dandy, I think we would say. But I just did notice at the end, when we got into this last section, I beg your pardon, sorry, we've jumped on there. Is that going to do it again? No, we're okay there. We're saying that he's a permanent secretary of the D-Notice Brigade. So he's, if we put it crudely, he's one of the government's
policeman for
for what's likely to come through. I don't get a warm feeling about this organisation. There's much too much attention on the pensions, and why do they need to be sitting on 38 million when clearly there are servicemen and women who need that money? But we'll leave it there. What I think we're looking at is government propaganda being pushed through a charity.
Okay, the Data Protection Bill has been announced. It's been launched today. It's going to provide what the government says are vital protections and flexibilities for Britain's world-leading research, financial services, journalism and legal services, because apparently one of the things they're really keen to do, Brian, is to promote freedom of the press to say whatever they like. And one way to do that is through the Data Protection Bill. So it's going to introduce safeguards to prevent and detect fraud. It's going to protect the freedom of the press. It's going to allow scientific research, and it's going to maintain the integrity of professional sports.
Good. I get a warm feeling from that.
Yes.
Right?
It's going to, well, before we mention what it's going to do in any more detail, I just wanted to highlight this because I thought this was particularly interesting. The Data Protection Bill is intended to bring the EU's General Data Protection Regulations, which are due to come into force in May next year, into EU law. So there you go.
Right. So we're coming out of the EU. That's Brexit.
Yeah.
But we're just going to take over all their data protection laws.
Yes.
Just in case.
Yes. And what we did apparently was that we successfully negotiated some exemptions from the EU's General Data Protection Regulations so that we could create what they describe as proportionate data protection regime, which is right for Britain. So it's particularly going to look at processing of personal data by journalists for freedom of expression and to expose wrongdoing. That's going to be safeguarded. Scientific and historical research data, research organisations, such as museums and universities, will be exempt from certain obligations, which might impair their core functions.
That
apparently.
was the lady that you covered a while ago.
Yes, who said the data protection was acted as a bane of her life. Yes, absolutely. National bodies responsible for the fight against doping in sport will continue to be able to process data without worrying too much about the Data Protection Act. And the financial services sector, which of course needs to be exempt from the Data Protection Act in order to do its business, is going to be allowed to do that as well. Yep. Yes. Okay. So there you go. Let's have a look at what Matt Hancock had to say. He's the digital minister, of course. He said, "We're strengthening Britain's data rules to make them fit for the digital age in which we live, and that means giving people more control over their own data."
Except when people ask for their own data and the authorities refuse to give it.
Absolutely.
Which is happening more and more, particularly with the police and local authorities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, excellent. Well, of course, if you don't behave yourself in Britain today, Theresa May's Britain, Tony Blair's Britain, you're likely to end up in prison. We were warned by MPs many years ago that there were black prisoners. What they meant by that were prisoners who were held in prison outside the rules. But there's been other very unpleasant stuff going on. And BBC here reporting, I'm going to say some good news. This man has been released. Headline is "Prisoner Trapped in Jail for 11 Years to be Released." But basically he was initially given a 10-month sentence because he got into a fight or hit his father, I believe it was. But he then set fire to his bed. So he was determined that he was a risk to the public. And he was then held indefinitely under imprisonment for public protection, IPP. So he got a 10-month sentence. He's been in for 11 years.
Yeah, because we don't live in a police state, Brian. You cannot be held in prison without due process in this country.
We've got MPs, members of Parliament, who look after our safety. We've got prisons inspectorate. We've got all of these people. Well, of course, we can be held in prison. And I'll just come on to this bit. This particular form of sentencing was apparently abolished in 2012. But look at this figure. More than 3,000 people in England and Wales are still serving. 3,000 people in prison. They don't know when they're going to get out.
Yes.
That is a pretty horrific statistic.
Right.
Statistic.
That's people that are in on imprisonment for public protection orders, or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
But of course, on top of that, the other thing that was abolished in 2012 or so was indeterminate sentences, whereby people have been given a long term in prison with no release date, and are only entitled to be released if they meet certain criteria. For example, admitting their guilt. Now, I was speaking to somebody in prison a number of years ago who said that he was aware of a number of his prison colleagues, shall we say, who were on indeterminate sentences and were simply refusing to admit their guilt. And you've got to ask the question, why would somebody that will only get a release date if they admit their guilt not admit their guilt?
Yeah, my answer to that is because that person is innocent. And therefore they have that foundation stone. They are not going to admit they're guilty for something they didn't do.
Yeah.
So this is very pernicious, very unpleasant procedure going on a daily basis in Britain. And we have Prime Minister Theresa May, former Home Secretary, of course, going on the world stage and lecturing other countries overseas on how they should run their communities and legal systems. It's outrageous. I would say thank you very much to Michael for sending this through. Arrived on the doormat this morning. Basically an envelope, but of course it's flagging up the plight of Melanie Shaw, who's still being held in prison in very unpleasant circumstances without any release date at all. And Michael's way of dealing with it is he's writing some very effective letters, but he's also flagging up Melanie's plight on the envelope itself. I think this type of action is very effective. I would encourage more people to do it, not just for Melanie Shaw, but in other campaigns. Grenfell Tower, get a picture of the tower on an envelope when you're writing in order to try and get some reaction.
Yeah. Okay, let's have a few advertisements then. The next Media on Trial conference taking place on Thursday, the 19th of October. in the Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church, which is in Shaftesbury Avenue in London. John Pilger is the headline speaker. Patrick Henningsen will be there. Vanessa Beeley, Peter Ford, Robert Stewart, Professors Piers Robinson and Tim Hayward, all speaking about issues around the media. And on Sunday, October the 8th, AV, Alternative View 8.1. Brian, you are one of the speakers. Ian Crane's event, of course, he'll be speaking. Patrick Henningsen will be speaking at that, and Dr. Graham Downing as well. And live programmes for tonight. We've got Humanity versus Sanity. I believe you are
going to join Ian Crane.
Yes.
Ian asked me this morning whether I'd speak. I think one of the subjects we're going to be talking about is what's happening to the police. And I know Ian's got a lot of information on what's been happening with the police around fracking and what's been taking place in the courts.
And then, of course, at 9 o'clock is Fracking Nightmare, when he will be discussing this week's shenanigans in the High Courts over the INEOS injunction.
Okay, right, well, join us for that tonight, but we'll get back on the subject of the police, and the topic is really police data. Now, a few weeks ago, we showed this. This is part of the minutes of an ACPO cabinet meeting. It was back in November 2012, but it's still relevant. Association of Chief Police Officers has now become the Police Chiefs Council, but this is the senior police officers who are deciding policy amongst the police. We flagged up that Cressida Dick was one of the people there at this particular meeting. And why were we interested? Well, we were interested because in it were figures around missing persons. And the figure mentioned here, this is for 1 year, was 330,000 missing persons. Now, we've been very interested in this statistic for a number of years because it's so uncertain. What we are particularly interested in is how many children go missing a year. And an ACPO officer told me personally in a committee room in Westminster some years ago that about 300,000 people went missing in UK, of which 2/3 were found, he said, which left us with 100,000, of which 1/3 were children. Now, this indicates a really amazing figure of 30,000 children missing a year, and we were never able to substantiate that figure because every direction you went for more information, more data, you ended up with a wall. So we were particularly interested today to see the BBC flagging up this case, tragic case of a young boy leaves home to go to school, but in fact goes back home, changes, gets some money from the bank, disappears on the train down to London and is never seen again. And this is the anniversary, this year is the anniversary of his disappearance, and a very long article by the paper actually, of course, spelling out the tragedy and the fact that the parents have no closure because this young man, they simply have no idea what might have happened to him. Now, in the article, we were interested that towards the end there's some statistics, and here they are. More than 135,000 individuals were reporting missing in England and Wales in 2015-16, some on more than one occasion. It says nearly 80% of cases are resolved within 24 hours and the vast majority in 7 days. Just over 50% of children go missing for less than 8 hours. There are currently about 3,000 people in the UK who have been missing for more than 10 years. Now, I was intrigued because 135,000, even accepting Scotland is missing there, doesn't come up to 330,000. So I thought it would be good to call in order to see whether I could get some more information on where this data had come from. So I initially called Missing People. Unfortunately, I couldn't get through to the statistics on one of their web pages. There appeared to be a problem. But what they said to me is, well, we effectively get most of our data from the National Crime Agency, and you can have a look at one of their documents. You can also go and have a look at what the National Crime Agency said. So I found this interesting. They were very helpful, very nice gentleman on the phone. But we've got a charity, but this charity follows in the footsteps of the police and the National Crime Agency. So a little bit of an interesting relationship. I went and had a look at the National Crime Agency. Well, the headline here, the banner, scrolls through. So this just happened to be the headline that I saw. And they're getting very excited, Mike, because apparently they've bust a school governor who was importing child sex dolls. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say, when you ask about how many missing children there are, it all gets a bit grey, but they're pretty good if you're importing a child sex doll. And so much so that that's a banner headline. Well, I was advised to go and look at a particular document with the statistics. When I went to the web location, I was intrigued to see this. So what have we got? It says, Missing Persons Data Report 2015-16. This is supposed to be the overarching document. But what it then says is there's been a few mistakes, and we've had to withdraw this article and just wait because a new one will be issued. We will publish a definitive 2015-16 report at the earliest opportunity.
But no indication as to when that is?
No, and I've spoken to NCA, Mike, and they've said they're going to give me some more information, but I've got to email in. Let's have a look at the previous year's document. This is for 2014-15. And I'm only going to put up a little bit of it because it's 11 pages of extremely complicated analysis. What it doesn't tell me is how many children went missing and how many have never been found. The same with adults. So just to give you a look at it, this is some of the under 18 data. Now, what they say is there's a difference between incidents and missing people, because some people are missing get reported more than once, and therefore there's a little bit of error. But when you look at the statistics here, they are unbelievably complex. Here's another layer through. 42 police services provided data for missing persons. Some didn't, of course. So we still don't have comprehensive data for across the UK. We've got a bit more here. This one is actually incident and individual data for absent people. And the reason for that is they've introduced a new category. Absent means a person not at a place where expected or required to be. From April 2014, the absent category was developed to include the term no apparent risk. So it's very complex. There's lots of definitions and changes. And when you try to grip the data to see what's going on, you can't really get there. What I did notice was, I'm shuffling through this report at the moment, but it says, for example, here, there's a note at the bottom of one of the pages, there's no statutory requirement for the police service in Northern Ireland to submit data, but it does fully engage with the work of the Missing Persons Bureau. So it's engaged, but it doesn't actually give any data.
So none of this data includes Northern Ireland then?
No, appears not. It then says Police Scotland has changed the method in which the yearly figure is calculated. The figures are not directly comparable year on year.
So we obfuscate the statistics each year by changing the methodology?
Yeah, and then I'll read on. These are some more of the caveats. The total call figure is slightly lower than actual figure due to direct entry into missing persons system. I don't understand what that means, but this is another caveat on why these figures are not accurate. The total call figure is the same as missing person incident figure due to direct entry into missing persons system. Police services have to date been unable to provide total call figures.
Why?
Well, they don't say that. There's no comment on why. Police Scotland is only able to provide a figure for total incidents. A further breakdown is not available at present.
So Police Scotland doesn't give a damn who's missing and who
well,
isn't?
It's more complex than that, Mike, because of course you've got missing people, you've got incidents, you've got absent people, but what we never actually get to down into the nitty-gritty is of how many people are going missing and how many are never found again. So I came into this particular page here. Bear with me because I'm probably going to have to call this one up again here. This is the one which says, yeah, here we are, 96% of missing people I think I can highlight that. There we are. 96% of missing people are found safe and well. Well, that's very interesting. So if we go back to the BBC article, what they're really saying is that 4% of the BBC figure of 135,000 are never found.
Yes.
So that's roughly 5,400 individuals. And we can assume roughly a third of those are children, because that's the way statistics fall. So crudely, we're missing 1,800 children. When I asked where they were, I got a bit of an embarrassed silence.
Nobody knows.
So nobody knows. So we're in Theresa May's Britain, 2017. We've got a lot of computers. We've got a lot of data protection, but we can't actually establish how many children are missing. But if you do read this document, you'll find that they're also saying, well, we know that the abuse statistics of children are gross underestimation. So I'll just add in this bit. I couldn't resist asking about the 360 missing Syrian children. I asked the Missing Person Bureau whether they had any data on those children. They said they didn't, but then they were playing second fiddle to the National Crime Agency. When I asked the National Crime Agency, they said, well, the thing is that it's the individual police forces that do the investigation, and we deal with more strategic matters. Well, I would have thought 360 missing children from one location, as it were, Syria, was a strategic matter, but we're waiting for clarification. I think, Mike, what we're looking at is the figures deliberately complicated, obfuscated, blurred, in order that we do not know how many children are going missing in this country. So what can we say about the BBC? Well, they're not very good on missing children, but they were pretty upfront in putting this study on the front page, which said that over a quarter of British people hold anti-Semitic attitudes. And we shouldn't worry. The Institute for Jewish Policy Research said the finding came from the largest and most detailed survey of attitudes towards Jews in Israel ever conducted in Britain. It said it's a bit worrying that if you're anti-Israel, you don't like the government's policy, you're probably going to be anti-Jewish.
What nonsense.
What nonsense. And we had a little look at who these people were. And what do they say? It's the only independent institute in Britain that specialises in researching the state of the contemporary Jewish communities. It's headed up by Lord Rothschild, so this is independent, of course. And it says here, their work is deliberately policy orientated, so they're out to influence people and change what they think and do. But I did notice one of their clients just happened to be the BBC. You couldn't make it up, Mike. We don't have to. That brings us to the end of the news today. Thank you very much for joining us. Do spread the news, tell family, friends and others about the work of the UK column. And if you're not already a subscriber, please consider helping us by a subscription. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.